From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Is Woonsocket on the brink of bankruptcy? The city was given a $12 million advance on education aid, and corporate giant CVS agreed to pay millions in taxes early. Meanwhile, Woonsocket leaders are in round-the-clock negotiations with 10 different public employee groups. Will it be enough? Our guest on the first half of Newsmakers, Woonsocket Mayor Leo Fontaine. Then, it was a bizarre and unexpected turn of events in this year's budget debate.
We're going to be in recess till tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Your motions can be made tomorrow when we've had time to think about things. It's 1:30 in the morning now. Nothing good happens after 1:30, my father told me.
For the Speaker, nothing good happened before 1:30. A budget that should have breezed through was stymied over a disagreement on a pension payment. The $8.2 billion tax and spend plan passed the next day, but by a razor-thin margin. Our guest on the second half of Newsmakers, Democratic State Representative Joseph Shekarchi. Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Morning.
Mayor, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. Why don't we have you answer the question that I asked at the very top of the show. How confident are you that Woonsocket can avoid receivership?
You know, it's hard to say and phrase it in the term of confidence. We've been battling this for some time, and every new obstacle that arises has been a matter of trying to find options to avoid it. So I think that we've done a great job in rolling with the punches, as it may be. But when it comes right down to it, things are tight, and we've got some legislation tied up at the State House right now that is a big part of our plan for recovery, and it's been all part of our whole 5-year strategy that we've been working on. And so right now, a lot of this is wait and see as far as what happens in the General Assembly.
The plan that you're referring to being tied up at the General Assembly is a supplemental tax increase.
Sure.
You need the support of the General Assembly to approve that, but more specifically, you need the support of your delegation to make that happen. Let's just, get to the elephant in the room, if you will. Representative Lisa Baldelli Hunt from Woonsocket wants your job. How much is politics playing a role?
You didn't take too long to get to that. The thing is I don't want to avoid the question, but this is so important to our city. I've done my best to try to keep politics out of my thinking on this, and I would hope that she and all of our delegation are doing the same, and that we're all working for the betterment of the community. So I don't want to dodge the question, but this is just too important for us to get caught up in that discussion. And if there's truth to it, then I think that'll play itself out over time. But my goal is to keep my face forward and focused on the issues at hand. And we'll let the politics play it out as election comes closer.
Let me ask you a different way. Have you talked to the delegation? Usually the leadership at the Assembly bases bills like this on what the delegation from that community tells them. So have you been in touch with them? What are they saying?
There has been a lot of communication from individual members and also the Budget Commission as a whole, and I become one of 5 members of that Budget Commission, so we've had meetings with our delegation up until not all that long ago. One of the issues at hand is there was a request by our delegation, and as part of the whole plan, we're trying to share the sacrifice among different groups, and the concern on their part, and my part for that matter, was that we didn't want the taxpayers to be left holding the bag, that we go through, do the supplemental, and then none of the bargaining units come through with negotiations. So the Budget Commission enacted these resolutions, or enactments as we call them, that basically would unilaterally implement some of these provisions of the 5-year plan if we were unable to negotiate settlements, because as of July 1st, all but one of our unions are out of contract. They're all expired. So that was basically the safety net that we put there for the taxpayers, and we felt that it should be enough. There's still some question as to whether it's enough for the delegation. But in the midst of all of this, we've been working diligently and really round the clock on negotiations. I mean, I was up late all over the weekend working with our groups, and the bargaining units have been working hard too. They've been really a partner in this, and we have reached tentative agreement with a good number of our groups. By the time this airs, we're voting with the Budget Commission on Friday evening to ratify a bunch of these contracts. A lot of the bargaining units have met and ratified them on their own already. So there's been great success after a lot of work has been done. There's still work going on with retirees as well. So a lot of the steps that have been worked on for so long are falling successfully into place, and we're hoping that that shows the good faith that's being put on the part of the city side to protect the taxpayers, and that the supplemental and the rest of the plan.
And I know I want to let Arlene in, but just to be clear to people at home, you do though need those bills to pass before the assembly finishes next week to make your plan work. What happens if they don't?
So when Council President Ward told the Valley Breeze that unless there are across the board pay cuts by July 1, I'm sure give or take a day or two, that he would be prepared to let the city go into receivership. Do you see that potentially happening, or have you seen enough on the table through these negotiations that that is not going to be the course of action?
I would say that we've reached agreement with a good number of probably all but one of our groups, and that they have an existing contract in place right now. So I think that we've reached agreement with all of the groups. They won't all be ratified by Friday. There will be one more that will need to be ratified next week.
Is that one group enough, though, to tilt the finances to the degree you'd have to go into?
If we don't get the other pieces from the General Assembly, I think that that could be the tipping point.
So if the General Assembly, yeah, right, exactly. That if the General Assembly does not pass what you need them to pass, you think is receivership inevitable? Is that what we're looking at?
I don't want to say it's inevitable, because again, we're always trying to find options. We've had so many obstacles thrown at us, and we need to deal with them all the time. And this started back in 2007 when the state started cutting funding to the cities and towns. Woonsocket, I did a cumulative total of everything that we've lost since 2007. And if you take 2007 as the base year, we've lost about $55 million cumulatively. That's almost impossible for any community to absorb, but we've done our best and we've done it, but we're dealing with the repercussions of that. So we're going to try to deal with the options, but when you look at the fact that the governor's proposals in last year's budgets to help cities and towns never made it anywhere, this year his proposals to help cities and towns for the most part did not make it, that's a big chunk of money that we're not getting. Now if you throw in the supplemental, and then there's also a bill regarding our pension fund that we need, yes. If all of those things don't fall into place, you know, there's only so much that, you know, it's like Popeye, you know, there's only, you know, you can't stand no more. I mean, it's really, it's a difficult situation, but we're going to continue to try to deal with it, and I'm hopeful, and I'm going to try to remain optimistic.
Receivership is not out of the question if they don't fall into place, as well as that one union.
Correct, because that's the option, the way that the state put forth this plan. The Budget Commission legislation puts the next step into receivership. Believe me, I think that the whole Budget Commission process, there needs to be a review of this as time goes on, because now that we've gone through it, and East Providence has gone through it, and Central Falls has gone through it, I think that we've seen a lot of the shortcomings of the legislation and the fail points of how it makes it difficult. So I think that it would be high time to get together a group of people that have gone through it and try to find ways of tweaking it to make it a better process to help cities and towns.
Which union is it, by the way?
The one that has the contract, Fire Union, has a contract in place right now. That's good until June 30th of next year.
Okay. You know, the sense I get is that the city is just treading water, and when you look at asking CVS for an advance in taxes, you ask the state for $12 million advance in education, that you know, you're almost delaying the inevitable. Aren't you going to be here again in another year? I mean,
if the plan falls,
we're talking short term. You know, what's the long term outlook for Woonsocket?
Basically, I think if we can get all of the pieces of the plan in place, then I think we've got a pretty stable future, and then we start building on that. And that's why it's so important that we get all of these pieces. We knew from the get-go that this was going to be a tight fit to make it all fall into place, but we think we've got a solid plan. The numbers are all there, and they work for the 5 years, and they put us in a much, much better position going forward.
Landmark had a suitor, as you know, 5 years ago that walked away from the deal. You've called upon the governor to sort of gin up the process to have Prime take it over. Peter Kilmartin said your energy should be directed toward making them file the documents that they haven't filed. They're totally insufficient for a review. Have you talked to Prime about filing those? And does he not have a point that they're the ones that are dragging this out?
There's two things. First of all, we've had two suitors that have dropped out. Early on, we had Caritas Christie that came forward. After all of the effort that they went through, they dropped out. Then you ended up with Steward Healthcare that came through. After all of the hassle that they went through, they ended up dropping out, and now we've got Prime Healthcare. There's been a lot of questions, but Prime has shown themselves. They were voted one of the top 15 healthcare systems in the country, 3 out of 5 years, I believe. And my concern at this point is that we've gotten to a point where they've turned over information. They were told that it wasn't enough. They've turned in a lot more information. At that point, they said, well, this is a little bit much for us at this point, and they suspended the review process. My request to the governor, I understand that the governor doesn't have a formal role in that process, but I think that as the top official in the state, that he has the ability to reach across all of the players and try to bring everybody together to find a solution for this, for Landmark. He toured the hospital. I was with him, and he promised the people there that he would do all he could, and that was my reason.
Is he breaking the promise, in your opinion?
You know, the thing is I don't want to say he's breaking the promise. I think it's time that we start delivering on this. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on all fronts, including Prime. So if that means bringing Prime to the table, and I'll be there to be part of this as well, and we have been. We've been to the court hearings, we've been to the hearings at City Hall. I've been in communication with the employee groups, with the bidders, through all of this. But it's a big process, and it's frustrating for the community when they see multiple other deals that are sailing through this process, and Landmark just gets hung up out on the shelf. So that was my request, reason for the request. I have faith that the governor will follow through to do what's best for the community, and I you know, was not meant as a besmirch of the Attorney General and the Department of Health. We just need to find a solution, and I think that's what government should be doing. Let's not find ways of making it more difficult or hold things to the letter of what the process is. Let's reach out and try to find ways of making it easier for our residents and our businesses. That should be what we're about.
Mayor, you were before the local pension study commission the other day, along with others there, with a plan to work on the pension plan that's underfunded in Woonsocket. I have to say, stunned when I looked at the presentation from Woonsocket, because the pension fund's assets fell from $94 million in 07 to $56 million in 09 during the crash, but now they're at $53 million. It looks like they've missed the entire recovery in the stock market and everywhere else. What happened to the pension fund?
In essence, what happened is we had a situation before I came in. I was on the council, and there was a lot of challenge being made at that point to our strategy. We had followed the same route that the state pension system did. We had the same financial advisors. We adopted the same expectations. When the market started tanking, all of us were saying, why aren't we rolling with the punches and adjusting a little bit quicker? But the process that we were in locked us into things more than we should have been. After I came on board, I appointed a new pension board that came on, and we were fortunate to attract the likes of former General Treasurer Roger Beejan, who's the chairperson, other financial advisors, CPAs, and we brought in a new financial advisor. The effort initially has been to try to preserve capital, so there's been an effort made to get into safe investments, because long term our goal is to try to find the solution and hopefully get into the state system, that we can buy our way out of the pension business, for lack of a better word, and get into the state system. And the last thing we wanted to do was suffer another loss in the market. So it is one of those things that some would look at and say, you missed the boat on it, but it comes down to a point where...
I mean, that's $40 million.
It really is. And so it comes down to a point where, but if the market would have tanked it even further, we would have been in a position that would have been impossible for us to make that next step. So this has really been a rebuilding period of time of trying to reorganize the board, get a new financial advisor in, and in effort to do that, the advisors basically have worked with the board and have recommended this strategy of trying to protect capital assets at this point, in hopes of being able to then build on that going forward.
Do you wish now, I know hindsight's 20/20, but do you wish now that the strategy had been slightly more aggressive than safe, as Ted points out?
Yeah, I mean, you can always look back and say that I wish I had done that, or that after you see the market change. But it's one of those things you can never tell at the beginning. And you know, I'm not a financial advisor. These guys that do this for a living are looking at the actuarials and looking at all of the data. And it's easy for a lot of us to second guess, the input that gets derived into these decisions, but I think that you've got to take it for what it is now, and I think that there's a lot that we have on our plate. We've got to get it into place and make this work.
Woonsocket Mayor Leo Fontaine, thank you very much for joining us on the program this week. We appreciate it. We hope to have you back real soon.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Maybe with good news.
That's right.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of great news. We're celebrating our 125th anniversary this year. We're having a big block party up at down on Main Street at the end of August, so we really welcome a lot of people to be part of it. CVS is celebrating their 50th anniversary this year, and so a lot of great things going on.
All right, we have to go to break. Happy birthday to Woonsocket. When we come back, State Representative Joseph Shekarchi. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining to my right, Ted Nesi and Arlene Violet. Joining us for the second half, State Representative Joseph Shekarchi, a Democrat from Warwick. Rep, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Welcome.
So, for the people that missed the top of the program, there was some interesting events that happened at the General Assembly this week. The vote on the budget was stalled and had to take place the next day. They went into recess for an evening. At issue during the debate was over whether or not to put a near $13 million budget surplus into the state pension plan, and that was required under the pension reform law that passed in 2011. You voted against doing that originally. How come?
I voted because, as I understood it, the law to promise that had already been met. The obligation, which is the annual retired contribution, the ARC as they call it, had already been met. So because that had been met, it was presented to us as a surplus. And the governor who had proposed it and the House Finance Committee, which had approved it, was using that surplus for other state needs as well. When it became apparent that there weren't enough votes for that, the leadership, to their credit, listened to the rank and file, kept that money in the pension system, and found some other funds available. They put some freezes on. They made some cuts to the bridge and turnpike article. They made some cuts to some aid to the airport. They made some other additional cuts, and they were able to find that money to plug that budget.
But that's the whole idea behind why they did that in 2011, because it was a surplus, because the retirement fund needs that money. So isn't it that sort of attitude that got us in the pension soup in the first place, kicking the can down the road, and we'll fund it more later?
My understanding is the whole purpose behind pension reform was to make it sustainable, and for the state as well as cities and towns to meet their obligations. And once those obligations are met, let's not forget that this is state taxpayer money that we're talking about. Once those obligations have been met, then the money should get spent also for the benefit of all of Rhode Islanders, not just for the people who are part of that pension system. My understanding of it, and I wasn't there for pension reform, but that we have been, and to the credit of the governor and the general treasurer and everybody, we have been meeting our obligations. So if we generate a surplus fund somewhere, we should use that on other kind of benefits for the state taxpayers, either a tax reduction or spending somewhere else.
So we should point out that the surplus is in fact going into the retirement fund.
I just want to also point out that it doesn't necessarily mean that anyone's going to get their COLA faster or that anybody's going to get a higher increased pension. It'll just go into the pension fund, which is probably
to shore it up.
To shore it up, to hopefully make it a stronger, sustainable system.
Just briefly, were you surprised leadership lost that vote? I mean, we were pretty shocked, the press corps down there.
I was not, because there was a lot of lobbying going on as you were walking in. There were a lot of unions. I've been contacted by mail, and there was a good floor lobby going on as legislators were walking into the chamber. There were pass outs and lobbying, so I could tell. And I think also, again, I wasn't there, but I think also for a lot of state representatives who had voted for pension reform, it was a difficult vote for them. So this was a way for them to give something back to the community that they had, in essence, affected by their vote, and to keep a promise. So I can understand how some of the long-term legislators felt about that.
So it would appear that the Democratic primary for governor will be a primary, Gina Raimondo being one of the candidates there. You ran her campaign for general treasurer. Will you support her if she runs as a Democrat and or an independent? And B, will you link up with her and run as lieutenant governor?
Well, to answer your first part question, is I will support Gina regardless of whatever she runs for. I believe she'll probably run as a Democrat. That's her decision to make and her announcement to make. But my relationship with her transcends politics, party politics, and I will support her whatever she's a proven leader. She's done a good job. She's a compassionate leader. She's strong, and I would support her regardless of whatever she ran for. As far as me running for lieutenant governor, I have no plans right now to run for any other office but for re-election.
Well, how about 5 minutes from now? I mean, are you looking at it?
I'm not looking at it right now. I'm concentrating on doing a good job as a state representative. If I do a good job and options present themselves down the line, I'll consider them. But I have no plans, and I'm not doing anything else other than concentrating on doing.
Would you rule out a run for mayor of Warwick?
I would rule out no runs for anything. I consider those opportunities when they came. Right now, that's not my plan. I'm concentrating on doing a good job for the city of Warwick and passing my legislation.
I want to go back to your current job then and ask you, you didn't speak up a lot during the budget debate. You seemed to be listening, as a lot of the freshmen were, but you did stand up and speak pretty passionately in favor of making that controversial $2.5 million payment on the 38 Studios bond. Just last week on this show, we had House Republican leader Brian Newberry make the case against. Why did you feel so strongly that the payment needed to be made? It's not a popular thing to do.
It's not a popular thing, and the political thing would be to vote against it. But I felt very strongly it was the right thing to do. And I didn't get elected. I didn't run to do the popular thing. I got elected to do the right thing. In addition to that vote for the $2.5 million payment, what none of you in the media have talked about was that we eliminated and we closed the Job Creation Guarantee Program, in essence, the program that created 38 Studios. I had a bill in earlier in the General Assembly session that would prevent EDC from ever giving out a loan guarantee. Now, that bill didn't pass, but the element and the substance of that was to shut down the 38 Studios program so we don't repeat that in the future. And that was part of that vote. In addition, which I felt very strongly about, in the budget, there was almost $39 million of state aid for the city of Warwick. There was aid, $35 million of aid to our school system. There was aid, city and town aid. You had Mayor Fontaine on earlier talking about city and town aid. And there was aid to the airport. And I was not, under any circumstance, going to vote for that. In addition to that, nobody in that building, and I listened, I did my own due diligence, could tell me or could tell anybody what the outcome would be if we defaulted. If we knowingly, willingly defaulted on our payments, our obligations. No one knew the answer to that.
But how is it our obligations? It's not a state obligation. The whole purpose of setting up these quasi-public agencies were to get above the $50,000 cap, so they're entities unto themselves, or the documents say it's entities unto them. So it really isn't our obligation, is it?
Let me finish my point. That gets me to the next question. But who would suffer? What would happen? We as a state would happen. I am not prepared when I cast my vote to gamble with the future bond rating for the state. It is too valuable, it's too important. We have airport expansion happening in Warwick. I have had constituents that airport expansion goes right down the heart of Main Avenue. I have constituents waited 13 years for a buyout. I wasn't prepared to make the airport corporation pay for a higher bond rating because of the 38 Studios, and those airport bonds are revenue bonds, so therefore they're based on the amount that the airport could afford, and we would somehow slow down or delay the expansion in the buyout of those residents. That's not fair to them. So I wasn't prepared for schools, I wasn't prepared for hospitals, for bridges. Whenever we go out to bond, that we would pay a higher bond rating for a substantial period of time. I wasn't prepared to gamble on that. And I understand how a lot of legislators wanted to vote no on it and did in fact vote no on it. But I wasn't one of them. I had nothing to do with 38 Studios, but we have to pay the piper. We as a state gambled on 38 Studios and lost.
The perception of that, though, might be hypocritical, especially considering your vote on not putting $13 million into the pension fund. Many people would say, and actually have said in this argument, that you're willing to, you have a moral obligation to Wall Street, but not to the retirees of Rhode Island?
Well, let me ask you something. That is part of my thought process and part of my voting. Why do you say Wall Street? Because the bonds were bought by insurance companies, by Transamerica. Mm-hmm. So what is the argument to that, Tim, that if the bonds were bought by nonprofits, then we should pay them back?
Why did we buy insurance then on the bonds?
The state didn't buy insurance. The insurance was not for the benefit of the state. The insurance was for the bondholders. And if we default on that, the bondholders get paid, and then the insurance company comes after the state. So it's not a free ride. That's another misconception.
Well, the insurance company could go after only EDC by virtue of the document language, not against the state of Rhode Island. The state is off the hook. The sole issue is whether revenue going into EDC from all the other leases and rentals they have somehow are exposed because past deals that they did expose it for judgment, as opposed to bulletproofing those revenues. The state, under no circumstance, has any obligation or cannot be sued because the documents say they cannot.
But EDC can. And who pays the? Let me explain. who pays the price for the for knowingly, willingly default?
Well,
for
you could have eliminated EDC, so they'd be suing a defunct agency.
Well, that was when the deal was created. I mean, and in fact,
Wouldn't exist anymore.
The House has passed legislation to modify that. I don't know the likelihood of that outcome. The problem with the whole 38 Studios is the way it was created, the lack of disclosure, but in all credit, there's a very accomplished attorney who's representing the state, and he's suing all of the potential negligent parties involved, and all this payment does is preserve that lawsuit. The other thing that you don't talk about, and you're the former Attorney General, I respect your opinion and your legal acumen, but if we don't have, the state of Rhode Island doesn't have damages, if we default on that, then we have no damages. If we don't have damages, what happens to the lawsuit? What happens with the motion to dismiss? Because you need liability, as you know, but you also need damages. So by paying the $2.5 million, we have had, in other words, incurred our first damages in the 38 Studio fiasco, and then we allow the lawsuit to continue. In addition to that article, there's also $50,000 to study the long-term impact. So we as the legislature have to vote again next year. So if, in fact, as more information comes out, we can kind of mitigate our damages or at least be able to find out what will happen, then we can have another crack at the apple next year.
You know, we are unfortunately out of time on the program. I had so many other questions, but I wanted you to explain the alcohol tax changes that were up at the General Assembly. It's like a matrix trying to figure that one out. But
we should have Rep Malik for that, though.
I'll come back again.
You know what? We're going to have to do that. I really appreciate you coming on the program. For our first half guest, we had Woonsocket Mayor Leo Fontaine. You can see it online, WPRI.com. For Arlene Violet, Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.
Too short.
I know it was.
I know.